Lumbering hulks, elegant constructs, and formidable walking junk heaps, the Dreadnoughts of Warhammer 40k are more than just war suits or tanks with legs. They are the tombs of great heroes given mobility and the war gear they need to bring vengeance upon the very foe that killed them. To put it simply, Dreadnoughts are revenants wrapped in ceramite wraithbone or scrap. The mere deployment of a Dreadnought is often enough to break the enemy's morale completely by itself, their armaments often rivaling the most heavily equipped tanks, and all of it animated by an enraged veteran soldier, a hero serving even in death. Of course, as faithful servants of the Imperium, we will be focusing on the Dreadnoughts of the Adeptus Astartes, but don't worry, although we have less data on them, we will also be covering some of the Xenos equivalents. It pays to know the enemy, after all. First off, we need to define our subject. Dreadnoughts are bipedal war machines with heavy armor and some of the most devastating weaponry available. Whatever the size or loadout, each of these walking tanks is an awe-inspiring sight on the battlefield. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of different types and patterns of Dreadnoughts specialized for a variety of tasks, but at the end of the day, they all share one key similarity: the dead heroes piloting them. There are plenty of walking war machines in the 40k universe, from the Paragon Warsuit all the way up to the Titans of Mars, but what makes a Dreadnought is that they are walking tombs, angry coffins with arms and legs, memorials with machine guns, if you will. In the Imperium, each Dreadnought is operated by a Space Marine wounded beyond the point of recovery, a right reserved only for true heroes or notable battle brothers. They are both blessed and condemned to serve within the steel frame of a mighty war engine, destroying the enemies of humanity for centuries, sometimes even millennia, after their duty would have ended on some far-away battlefield. Most warriors interred into a Dreadnought sarcophagus are so horribly maimed that not much of their bodies exist aside from at least part of their brains and spines. So to enhance the capabilities of its pilot, they are fitted with a mind impulse unit which controls every aspect of their new metal body. Weapon systems, sensors, a Voxcaster to communicate, and even control over the power output of their compact reactor. Although serving in death is a rare honor, its reality is rather grim, as we discussed in our recent lecture on the worst jobs in the Imperium. With all bodily sense gone and plagued with phantom pain, the interred hero upon first awakening in their new bodies are often overcome with confusion and fear, further complicated by the sometimes decades a Dreadnought will spend in stasis to preserve their minds while traveling from warzone to warzone. This, plus the huge strain that the Mind Impulse unit puts on the already damaged mind of a pilot, has ultimately led to only a handful of Dreadnoughts being used for more than a few centuries, let alone millennia. Names such as Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves, Malkarion the War Sage of the Night Lords, or Moriar the Chosen of the Blood Angels are names of interred warriors that have become legends over the 10,000 years of the Long War. But we are not here to give a history of these heroes. We're here to look at the many patterns of war machines they pilot. So let's start with the classic, the Castropherum. Often lovingly referred to by 40k players as the box knot due to its box-like shape, the Castropherum pattern is not only iconic but also the most common and versatile of all Dreadnoughts. In over 10 millennia of constant battlefield use, the Castropherum has seen combat from the days of the Great Crusade all the way to the Indomitus Crusade. Similarly to power armor, there have even been multiple marks of Dreadnoughts, with the most common being the Mark IV and Mark V. What sets the Castropherum apart from other Dreadnoughts, aside from its shape, is its thermic reactor. Although less powerful than the power systems used by other Dreadnoughts, the thermic reactor is used by a variety of Space Marine vehicles, such as the Rhino, and its production and standardization are so widespread that the Castropherum patterns are extremely easy to produce and repair. The thermic reactor does come with a noticeable setback, however, in that it limits the size that the machine can attain, thus causing the frame of the Dreadnought to be smaller than other variants. This limitation does not, however, prevent this pattern from equipping a staggering amount of weapon systems. The versatility and easy adaptation of the Castropherum has led it to have the greatest number of subvariants and types of any other Dreadnought frame. Some are specialized for long-range combat, such as the Hellfire variant, where both weapon mounts are given to such powerful weapons as las cannons, missile launchers, plasma cannons, or even autocannons. When the fighting becomes close and personal, some chapters prefer using their dreadnoughts as brutal melee beasts armed with 2 close combat weapons. This can take a variety of forms, such as the Blood Angel's unique Furioso Dreadnought, which is also armed with a frag cannon and hull-mounted Magna grapples that are capable of pinning tanks in place to prevent their retreat from a brutal melee onslaught. The ironclad variants are purpose-built to be the apex siege walkers, coming equipped with additional weapons to destroy close-packed infantry in trenches, or with hunter-killer missiles to target enemy tanks and bunkers. There are few fortresses within the galaxy that could deter the might of an ironclad siege dreadnought. Even their melee weapons are formidable, as they are more than capable of using seismic hammers for busting walls, dreadnought-sized chain fists for even more tank destruction, and hurricane bolters to shred defending infantry. And among these variants, there are even more specially designed walkers such as the Librarian Dreadnought, which, despite being designed by the Thousand Sons Primarch Magnus the Red during the Great Crusade, continue to find use amongst the Blood Angels and Grey Knights of the 42nd millennium. These rare machines allow for an interred psyker to retain some small measure of their original psychic might, making the already formidable power of a dreadnought further amplified with the energies of the warp. Of course, all this only scratches the surface of the Castropherum's box-shaped iceberg, as more subtypes and variants exist, such as those purpose-built for chaplains or the Grim Dark Angel's Mortis variant. And all of those can be further enhanced as their pilots prove their control and become truly venerable, with more and more conflicts under their metaphorical belts. And even though we have covered a lot of sub-patterns here and talked about how common the Castropherum is, it should still be noted that each dreadnought is treated and venerated as a relic. However widespread the Castropherum is in contrast to older variants, a dreadnought always remains a prized relic of a chapter, and they see deployment only in the most crucial of battlefields. The loss of a single one of these ancient war machines is seen as a tragedy. Currently the oldest dreadnought pattern in use by the Imperium, the Contemptor has become a myth on the battlefield. Contrary to the Castropherum and its smaller and stocky frame, the Contemptor pattern is larger with a more rounded humanoid shape. It was also considered to be one of the more powerful dreadnought of its time, thanks mostly to its implementation of the automatic arc reactor. This arc reactor greatly improved the dreadnought systems, allowing it to achieve increased speed and strength and additional defensive systems in the form of the aptly named adamantic shielding. The same type of shielding which would later be applied to the storm shields of Space Marine Terminators. Although many weapon systems are shared by Contemptors and Castropherums, it is important to note that the Contemptor's higher power output and advanced systems allowed it to regularly field experimental and more powerful weapons, such as the Carries pattern assault cannon or the legendary conversion beamers. So it's sad to note that, as with most things after the Great Crusade, the schematics to produce new Contemptor dreadnoughts were lost. This and the more easily developed production of other dreadnoughts left only a few of them operable in the modern day of the Imperium. These few active Contemptors are even considered irreplaceable objects of worship and are understandably only allowed to be piloted by the most legendary warriors of the Astartes legions. It might even surprise you to learn that during the fires of the Horus Heresy, some of the only warriors on the battlefield to be a true challenge to the Primarchs, aside from other Primarchs themselves, were actually Dreadnoughts. Angron, the Primarch of the World Eaters, found genuine joy in fighting these armored beasts, with a pair of Contemptors even managing to greatly wound a Primarch. In one such case, Lork, the first master of the Warhounds Legion, came to blows with Lorgar of the Wordbearers on the world of Nuceria, where the traitor Primarch was transforming Angron into a demon. Together with the last librarians of the World Eaters, Lork nearly killed Lorgar, were it not for the intervention of the newly formed demon Angron. Though not quite as versatile as its boxy little brother, Contemptors are renowned for their adaptability, and many legions experimented with unique variants suited to their preferred method of warfare. The first sub-pattern was one developed out of necessity. The Contemptor, being a little too expensive to build and maintain, was a big problem during the rapid expansion of the Great Crusade, and so the Cordis pattern was designed using less sophisticated or temperamental components. Unfortunately, this led to faster pilot burnout, and Mechanicum put a stop to using them until the Horus Heresy brought about a lack of supplies, and the Cordis made a comeback. Then there's the Mortis pattern, which fills the niche of a heavy ranged support platform by replacing the walker's heavy power fists with a pair of heavy ranged weapons like las cannons, multi-meltas, autocannons, or Gary's assault cannons. This plus its adamantic shielding made the Contemptor Mortis a devastating force on the battlefield until the cheaper Castropherum and its Hellfire variant came into service. Now, any remaining Mortis Dreadnoughts that survive into the 41st millennium are more often used as anti-air support than anything else. And of course, the Contemptor even had a Psyker variant called the Osiren class, which was designed by Thousand Sons Primarch Magnus the Red and was the basis for the Librarian Dreadnoughts that came later. Perhaps the most hilarious subtype of Dreadnoughts ever created was the Incendius. It basically is a regular Dreadnought except modified to grant it temporary flight with the inclusion of a Dreadnought-scaled jump pack. Forged exclusively on the homeworld of the Blood Angels, the Incendius is designed so that it would not lag behind in the Legion's infamous assaults and lightning strikes. Even the Custodes, the bodyguards of the Emperor himself, would make use of the Contemptor with a couple of patterns of their own, which we'll go over a little later. But the raw power of the Contemptor was a huge factor in the rise of the Astartes legions and directly led to the technological breakthroughs that would make the Castropherum such a solid and dependable war machine. Let's go right from the oldest pattern to the newest one, the Redemptor Dreadnought. This walker is a newly created variant made in the modern day of the Imperium to accompany the Primaris Astartes created by Archimagos Belisarius Cawl. These are the current poster boys when it comes to Dreadnoughts, and are more than likely the first ones that people being introduced to the setting will have seen, especially if you recently played Space Marine 2. Modernized in both looks and equipment, the Redemptor was designed to be taller, broader, and better than the models which had come before. The way they sought to achieve this is through the use of fiber muscle bundles and multiple hyper-dense reactors in place of the two previously used alternatives. It's important to know that the tech priests who designed the Redemptor were able to fit more power and weapon systems specifically by having no regard for the pilot at all beyond that of a control mechanism serving the greater whole. So while the neural links implanted into the pilot allow for miraculous achievements of dexterity and control, their life force is vastly drained by the energies exerted by the Dreadnought. More often than not, this leaves the pilot as nothing more than a sack of burnt organs to be replaced by the Mechanicus after just a couple of decades, which is definitely a change in the previously reverent treatment of Space Marine heroes. Unlike the other Dreadnought patterns we have mentioned so far, the Redemptor Dreadnought doesn't have a lengthy service record yet, and so only has 3 developed sub-patterns: the Brutalis, the Ballistus, and the Invictor Warsuit. While the base Redemptor acts as a well-rounded machine of war going into battle with a massive assault cannon or plasma cannon as a ranged weapon, the Redemptor also makes use of chest-mounted weaponry like Fragstorm grenade launchers, storm bolters, and an Icarus rocket pod for an anti-air defense, as well as a massive power fist which includes an onslaught assault cannon or a heavy flamer. The Brutalis is a brutal close combat vehicle equipped with either claws or fists specific to the model and attached with a variety of heavy weapons and bolters on its chassis. The Brutalis shows a capability of inflicting ranged damage, but the closer it gets, the more lethal it becomes. The Ballistus, on the other hand, goes into the opposite extreme, preferring ranged warfare with a missile launcher for destroying ground and aerial targets, but also a massive and highly destructive double-barreled las cannon capable of decimating tanks and heavy infantry from afar. Finally, there is the Invictor Warsuit, which is rather unique, as it is the only heavy walker in the Space Marine arsenal not to be piloted by a mortally wounded hero. These machines are used for stealth operations and hit-and-run tactics, which remain rather baffling due to their monstrous size. However, as this variant is not a true Dreadnought, we won't be spending any more time on it. The Redemptor and its subtypes closely mimic the Castropherum, paying a close homage with upscaled, up-armored versions of the most popular variants of the Venerable Walker. The question now only remains, what other variants will we see in the future? The Derido Dreadnought was designed for one job and one job only: to bombard the enemies of mankind with an eye-watering amount of munitions. Originally developed using the Contemptor Dreadnought as a base, the Derido was created during the time of the Great Crusade as one of the first real joining of Martian and Terran technologies. Although a rare weapon on the battlefield and highly valued by any commander, this boat-shaped walker was able to carry 5 different ranged weapon mounts, Within its chest were 2 slots for smaller anti-infantry weapons, such as heavy flamers or heavy bolters, while its arm mounts were able to house some of the most powerful ranged weapons the Space Marine legions had access to. To add even more destructive power, the tech priests added a variety of massive missiles on its back, or even a shield generator. The Derido became the ultimate support walker, a nightmare for tanks and aircraft alike, and if deployed in a defensive posture, these dreadnoughts caused disgusting amounts of damage among their enemies. This pretty much established the Derido as the go-to test platform for a variety of Adeptus Astartes weaponry, with weapons like the Volkite Falconet and Boreas air defense missiles being prime examples of weapons originally tested through the platform. This change in direction from Contemptor to Derido caused many difficulties in their manufacturing because it turned out that the Derido was extremely resource intensive to produce and distribute, not to mention arm, even by Dreadnought standards. However, this would not stop demand from increasing after the events of the Horus Heresy, as its extreme firepower caused both Loyalist and Chaos legions to request or acquire these dreadnoughts more and more. The specialty of this pattern has left no room for any real variations of sub-patterns being developed, and instead any variations were presented through the different weapons equipped. These weapons can range from the previously mentioned Volkite Falconets and Boreas air defense missiles to the imposing Arachnus heavy las cannon battery, the massive Hellfire plasma cannonade, and the terrifying Anvilus autocannon battery. But even though the Derido was clearly the king of firepower, it still looked like a child's plaything next to our next entry. It's time to take a look at the Leviathan. Towering over even other Imperial dreadnoughts, the Leviathans were scarcely produced, and even more scarcely deployed, as the resources required to make this amalgamation of Dark Age technologies could rival even that of the Imperial Knights. Some within the Imperium even suspected the Leviathan was designed to kill and counteract the automata of the Martian Mechanicum, a way for the Imperium to gain ultimate control, a suspicion that was supported by the fact that the Emperor himself commissioned them to be manufactured in secret on Terra, and it was purposefully hidden from the gaze of the Mechanicum. Their limited numbers also made them a feared sign on the battlefield, as these indomitable siege units would shadow even the modern Imperial walkers. Understandably, the Mechanicum themselves were said to have been uncomfortable by their existence. The Leviathan Dreadnought was originally designed for siege warfare, coming equipped with siege claws and drills to tear apart tanks and fortifications alike. In addition, the gigantic frame and powerful reactors could support the use of devastating weaponry like grav flux bombards, cyclonic melta lances, and quad-barreled Leviathan storm cannons. With secondary weapon mounts focusing on anti-tank and anti-infantry, the Leviathan remains the most dangerous dreadnought ever fielded, only being rivaled by the best of the Custodes variants like the Telemon. The rare few that have survived to the current millennia are hidden within the vaults of their chapters to be used only in the most dire time of need, as most are piloted by warriors who have been living this horrific afterlife since the heresy and are understandably a little unhinged at the best of times. One of the few examples of a Leviathan seeing combat in the 41st millennia would be the former High Lord Commander of the Red Scorpions, Carib Culn, now known as the Risen. Surprisingly, Lord Culn still holds senior command of the chapter when awoken, and his vendetta against Huron Blackheart still continues in death, the chapter relentlessly hunting down the Red Corsairs to this very day. Although the Custodes are different from the Space Marines in many ways, it might interest you to know that even they are not above using dreadnoughts, and in fact, likely started the trend among Imperial super soldiers. As you would expect, however, Custodes dreadnoughts are the most advanced and shiniest walkers in the entire Imperium. The heroes of the Custodians who are interred into a dreadnought form a group called the Moritoi, and the first of these dreadnoughts were gifted an inscription carved upon its hull by the Emperor himself. It would be the first of these Moritoi who would coin and popularize the phrase, "Even in death I still serve." Only venerable and master-crafted Contemptors were fit to be the bare minimum accepted into the Emperor's personal bodyguard. The Contemptor Achilles is the first of these and most common of the Moritoi, with Custodes inside often being in a worse condition than their Space Marine counterparts. After all, it takes a lot more damage to drop a Custodes warrior. The advanced Achilles is honed to be a deadly weapon by the still intact mind of its pilot, with its equipment and fighting style mimicking that of the regular Custodes warrior. A massive guardian spear called a Dread Spear that exchanges the usual bolter with a Corvlaz pulsar, and wrist-mounted weapons that can range from the standard storm bolters and incinerators to the terrifying Adrathic destructors. The Contemptor Galatis simply replaces the Dreadspear for a massive Galatis Warblade and Praesidium Shield. Of course, these were only the basic Dreadnoughts of the Custodes, and there exists a bigger, more impressive version for the greatest of the Imperium's heroes, the Telemon Heavy Dreadnought. The Telemon is the pinnacle of Imperial Dreadnought design, superior even to the Leviathan, dwarfing every other walker available until you get to the Imperial Knights anyway. And it's not just huge, but agile as well, outmaneuvering its lumbering cousins and even appearing to be as precise or faster than the best living Custodes in the 10,000. To be interred within a Telemon is the highest honor any Custodes could be given. With a mere handful in the entire galaxy, even its weapons are custom-built and designed to unleash their own unique terror upon the battlefield. Plasma projectors, bolt launchers, storm cannons, and accelerator culverins, and a powerful refractor field to protect it all. It is a rare enemy indeed that could even hope to stand in the way of a Telemon. Now, it is to be expected that the Chaos Space Marines, being the traitorous former warriors of the Imperium, would have their own nightmarish version of Dreadnoughts. But where the Imperium treats those interred within a Dreadnought as heroes, being placed within a Chaos Hellbroot is nothing short of a lifetime prison sentence. Although Hellbroots are sometimes referred to as Chaos Dreadnoughts, it should be noted that the Traitor Legions still maintain some of the older, more venerable variants of Dreadnoughts, just like their Loyalist chapter counterparts. Hellbroots, however, are mutated nearly beyond recognition and are a nightmare on the battlefield. These mountains of steel and demon flesh were once ordinary Dreadnoughts, but due to the corrupting powers of chaos, they have become warped and insane, little more than screaming berserkers. Over time, the pilot's body melds with the machine, enveloping them to the point where all that is left of them are madmen wanting only to cause destruction to dull the pain of their hellish existence. What might even be worse than being punished with becoming a pilot for a Hellbrute would being tricked into it, which has been known to happen. There is no standardization for these horrible monstrosities, but most take the rough form of the Castropherum Dreadnought with its boxy shape and wide stance. As a result, its weaponry ends up being similar to its Imperial counterparts, but with the addition of some horrifying and fleshy melee weapons like scourges, flails, and hammers. Leave it to the ruinous powers to make something as horrible as a Dreadnought's existence even worse. If mimicry is the highest form of flattery, then orcs must have a lot of positive things to say about Space Marine Dreadnoughts. Orc Def Dreads, called Orc Dreadnoughts back in the 2nd and 3rd editions, are a twisted scrap heap version of the Space Marine Castropherum. Unlike Space Marines, however, the pilot of a Def Dread is a willing volunteer who enjoys the rattling, clanking of its legs and rumbling of its engine. Def Dreads, on occasion, have even been found to be able to go toe-to-toe with the best of the Imperium's Dreadnoughts. Imposing figures, Def Dreads are usually piloted by orcs directly wired and forever connected to their war machine, giving up a good amount of their innate orkiness to achieve something greater. Although favoring not 2 but often 4 deadly close combat weapons, these machines are often equipped with big shootas, rocket launch pads, scorches, and custom mega blastas, making each Def Dread a one-of-a-kind marvel of walking scrap. But the Def Dread also has a smaller cousin known as the Killican, which is more or less the grot version of the Scrap Walker, a smaller, more agile machine geared more to ranged combat than melee. In fact, Grots are even more excited to be given the opportunity to pilot a Killican than an orc is a Def Dread, as the massive power boost allows the usually tiny creatures to finally get one over on their orcish bullies. Notable variants of the Def Dread include the Big Mech Dread, which is piloted by a mech boy instead of a regular orc, and is normally clever enough to avoid wiring himself directly into his machine, and so can get out whenever he wants. Another imposing monster of a combat walker is the Mega Dread and the Mecha Dread, which is capable of facing anything from Redemptor Dreadnoughts all the way to Imperial Knights, but are rarely seen on the battlefields of the 42nd millennium. Elegant and powerful, graceful and beautiful, calling an Eldari Wraithlord a Dreadnought is a bit like comparing a swan to a pelican. Sure, they're both large birds, but they're not exactly competing in the looks department. However, if there is one tradition shared between the Eldari and the Space Marines, it's the treatment of their fallen warriors, as both seek to honor and keep their memory alive in their unique ways. Although Space Marines do this via gene seed recovery and relic equipment, the Eldari do this in a more literal way, using Spirit Stones. Spirit Stones are carried by every Eldari to keep their soul from being consumed by the Chaos God Slanesh. Upon death, the Spirit Stones prevent a warrior's soul from reaching the warp and are collected and placed within the Infinity Circuit, a sort of ghost internet at the heart of every craft world where an Eldari may still grant their wisdom to the rest of their kind through psychic communion. Yet this is not the end for some Eldari, as the Spirit Stone could be used to power various Wraith constructs, such as Wraith Guards, Wraith Lords, and Wraith Knights, to name a few. The craft world Eldari make almost everything out of Wraithbone, a psychically active plastic-like material that is literally sung into shape by bone singers. It's stronger than plasteel and harder to damage than adamantium. Wraithbone is a wonderfully flexible material that can be controlled by anyone with the talent to do so, which is why it's used to make constructs, as the spirits inside their stones have a much easier time controlling these new bodies than a Space Marine could ever hope to have with a Dreadnought. Of the known Eldari constructs, the Wraith Lord is the most similar to a Dreadnought in both size and its intended purpose, although the average Wraith Lord stands taller than even a Leviathan. The spirits that are interred within a Wraith Lord are typically great heroes who still have much more to give and are eager to defend their dwindling people. Although much of the construction and variations of these walkers are not known to us, it is interesting to learn that similarly to the Blood Angel's Librarian Dreadnought, there is a Wraith Seer variant, which is a Wraith Lord driven by the soul of an Eldari Seer, capable of using devastating psychic blasts despite being very, very dead. Typically, a Wraith Lord is armed with 2 flamers or shuriken catapults on their wrists, complementing their melee options of either power fists or the enormous Ghostglaive swords. Their hands are free for these options because the heavy weapons are typically shoulder-mounted, giving the Wraith Lord a height advantage in addition to some versatility. These heavy weapons are very similar to the Astartes Dreadnoughts, scatter lasers for shredding infantry, bright lances for tank hunting, and star cannons to blast heavy threats with superheated plasma. Unfortunately, despite having a versatile armory of weapons, Wraith Lords are plagued by a phenomenon known as Wraith Sight, where the soul within cannot tell which dimension they are in, resulting in the warrior acting slower and even stopping mid-combat as they become confused. To prevent a friendly fire incident from happening, Wraith Lords are often guided into battle by Spirit Seers who can aid the construct, acting as a sort of psychic tech marine and psychic seeing eye dog all in one. Regardless of their disabilities, a fight between a Wraith Lord and another Dreadnought is a terrifying and awe-inspiring sight, a poetic battle between the deadly grace of a dying people and the brutal wrath of the younger races. Dreadnoughts are a deeply flavorful part of 40k, and it makes sense that many of the armies in the universe have some sort of equivalent, and there are still Imperial variants we never covered because there's only a passing mention of them and nothing more. But impractical stomping war machines driven by dead warriors being slowly driven insane by their horrific existence is extremely 40k, and we hope GW keeps adding to their story. But what about you all? Are there any other Dreadnoughts you'd like us to cover? What other Dreadnoughts would you like Games Workshop to add? And if you could design one yourself, what would it look like? Let us know down in the comments below, and make sure you like and subscribe for the next time you might be in need of more lore.